Our next speaker is Ron Epstein. He's back. Excited to hear a good conversation between Tim and Ron. Ron is a managing director in America's Equity Research, covering aerospace defense and multi-industrials with large aerospace components. He is based in New York and covers companies listed in the United States, Canada, and Brazil. He joined Merrill Lynch in 2001. In the Institutional Investor All-America Research Poll, he ranked as a top 3 analyst in aerospace defense electronics for the last 13 years and number one for the last 7. He is fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society and is also a mentor for the Techstars Space Accelerator. He's frequently cited as an industry authority by trade and news publications and has appeared on numerous television programs. Previously, he worked as a research scientist in applied aerodynamics technology at Boeing Phantom Works. He was also an adjunct faculty member in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Washington University in St. Louis, teaching fluid dynamics and control systems. He has a BA with obviously highest honors from Skidmore College, an MBA with honors from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and a PhD in mechanical engineering from Duke. Tim and Ron, take it away.
Hey guys, great to be here. Thanks. Good to see you again.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
Tim?
thanks for being here, Ron. I was as I was hearing your bio, I was thinking, how did someone with that education end up as if not the most important analyst in the aerospace sector for equities research, easily top 2 or 3. Like what got you there?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm one of a group of us who do this, right?
Yeah.
I was working, I was at McDonnell Douglas. That's where I started my career, and then we got bought by Boeing. And to be candid, I just got really bored. It was like a mile deep in one thing, and I kind of wanted a bigger vantage point. So went back to school, got an MBA, learned a little accounting, and then was a summer intern at Merrill Lynch, and then never left. Still here. So,
yeah. No, and that's really cool. We hear that a lot with people when they're making that shift. It's one day they're just like, I'm kind of done with where I'm at. And
I get to look at whole industries now, which is fun.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And seeing that across the breadth no doubt reinforces each individual component that you work on. You get to see analogs across different sectors. So for people who are not well versed in Wall Street, the financial markets, what is there like a scratch and sniff version of what you do?
Yeah, sure. So a couple different things, right? So it's a good question, because when people are like, you're a Wall Street analyst, so what's that mean, right? So like to my wife, like, what do you do? My kids ask me a lot, like, Ted, what do you do? So a couple things. I work for a pretty complex institution. So if you think about Bank of America, we've got a commercial bank, we have an investment bank, which are separate functions.
Yep.
We also own Merrill Lynch, right? So that's largely a retail brokerage, meaning mom and pops, Main Street, Wall Street, that kind of thing. So what do I do? I am responsible for looking at companies in the aerospace and defense sector and adjacent sectors. Right now we cover about 40 companies, although largely because of commercial space that's increasing. There's a lot of, as you all know, something we'll talk about, a lot of activity in the space right now. And what that coverage means is we publish, we on earnings, we have an investment opinion, and somehow or another, probably the bank is doing business with these companies, potentially from a capital markets perspective, raising capital. And when you think about what I do, back to the constituencies, I have professional investors, institutional investors who are my clients. That would be to folks out there, if you're invested in, a Fidelity fund or a pension fund, those folks. So I'm an advisor to them. I'm an advisor to our 25,000 brokers. So, when Bank of America upgrades or downgrades Northrop Grumman, that's me. So I give advice to them. And then on all of our capital markets activities. So if we do an IPO or anything like that, that all comes across my desk. And I have an independent view from the bankers. And at some point we have to see eye to eye.
Yeah. No, that sounds like a really cool job to be able to have that independent view into what's going on and be that objective voice and say, here's where I see this going based on these factors. I mean, I spent most of my career doing intelligence analysis, and it feels like there's a lot of analogs between that, where you're meant to be that honest broker, where the bankers may be saying like, no, we need to invest here. You're saying the data says we need to take this, look at it this way, look at it that way.
And I would say, to the credit of my firm, they really do care about what I think. If I don't like something, they want to know it. If I do like something, they want to know it. And if I don't like something, that doesn't mean they won't be involved, but they want to have a better understanding of the risks they're taking. So there really is, my work is very independent from what goes on in the investment bank. Yeah.
No, and I think, one thing I was struck as preparing for this interview and reading a lot of like the earning calls that you've been on, had never done that. I knew earning calls happen where CEOs are reporting their quarterly results. But when you look at the market the next day, you look at some of the commentary the next day, what you all as the analyst are talking about with the CEO dramatically changes what happens that next day. What is that like?
Well, it can, right? So, a couple thoughts. Different analysts take a different approach to the job.
Yeah.
I look at my fiduciary responsibility to investors very, very seriously. I don't look at myself as my little franchise as an extension of PR of a company. Right. Sure. So I'm willing to ask hard questions because that's my job. I mean, and for an investment banker, it's different. For an investment banker, their client is the company.
Yeah.
For me, my client is the investor. And because of where I sit, could be your grandma. And I take that very, very seriously. So, I try to ask, the hard questions and hopefully kind of peel back the onion. And if you ask a good question that resonates, it can be pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's a forum it's a public forum.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's reminded, there was one last fall with, I think, Lockheed, where you more or less asked, where's Lockheed going? There's like midway through the questions, nobody's yet to ask this. And you're like, there's no plan for you guys. You haven't mentioned what's next. Like, what's the plan? And that's the hard questions the public markets need to hear.
Well, a lot of times the question, I always find, if you're going to be on an earnings call with a CEO in a public forum, if you're asking what's interest expense, it's a waste of time. Like that's right. I mean, you can talk to the CFO about that or whoever offline, but when the company looks like it's maybe going through a difficult strategic time or a period where there's a lot of decisions to be made, sometimes it's the obvious question. Like where there was a call where I did back with Boeing when they first got into the pickle with the 737, and the question was just, how could this happen?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I'm glad you brought up Boeing, because I was, you noted in your talk here in this forum last year that defense contractors like Lockheed and Boeing are using investments in commercial space startups as like engines of innovation. You saw that happening in 21. How do you see that changing now as we go into 22, if at all?
Yeah, I think it's continuing, right? So I think an interesting example of that is Lockheed Martin, so particularly germane to sort of the space world. Lockheed's been an investor in Terran Orbital.
Yep.
They're also investor in ABL space. And, so, two early stage,
Yeah.
or somewhat early stage, depending on which one, but two smaller innovative startups that they're an investor in. And what's fascinating about it, I mean, they're both interesting companies. They both bring forward really interesting technology, and arguably they can do it at a pace. And this isn't a knock on Lockheed. It's just they can do it at a pace that Lockheed couldn't. I sit in an organization, Bank of America has 250,000 employees, and the amount of red tape and things that we have to do to just kind of do something a little innovative can be tricky. It's the same thing at a big company. So, I think it's an interesting strategy for some of the defense contractors to, kind of, how can I say it, to propel forward some of the real innovative technology.
Yeah. And we're starting to hear from the Pentagon that they want more of that. That's something that they're starting to push more and more. And it'll definitely be interesting to see almost how far down those defense contractors reach for some of those really innovative startups that, maybe are just in a seed round. And is that something that they're willing to take the risk on for certain technologies? That'll be really interesting to watch.
Well, if you look at a defense contractor, they're very, how can I say it? They've optimized contracting.
Yeah.
And maybe one of the, how can I frame it? One of the side effects is that they're not always the most innovative.
Oh, right.
Right. So it's a way to get some innovation in a framework, quick innovation in a framework that doesn't promote quick innovation.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And it's almost a microcosm of what government goes through with contracting things out. And so it's really interesting, and probably something the Defense Department should be looking at, is watching this and seeing which of these contractors does it well and how they do it.
Yep, that's right.
There's a lot of lessons that can be pulled up from that.
And they're all doing it a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
Different flavors, different way of doing it. Boeing has made for a while a big investment in Whisk. And that's not space, but that's some innovative, commercial aerospace.
Yeah.
I was a little critical of that because there's other places where they could be investing that are maybe more immediately relevant. But to be fair, it's a way to get some innovation in a way that's maybe quicker than they could do it internally.
Yeah. Well, and do you see some of these, I guess the main big merger, this Lockheed Aerodyne merger that fell through, is that going to impact some of these large firms?
Well, I think the takeaway from Lockheed Aerojet was, and Lockheed might be a little bit of a special case. They're a very big defense contractor, right? And one of the worries, and it kind of gets back to innovation, was as the industry has consolidated, have we paid a price in innovation? And I think the fear was coming out, and it's always administration. I was about to say administration specific, but that's not fair. The different administrations have a different flavor in kind of how things happen.
Sure.
And this administration's made it pretty clear that they want to keep some level of competitiveness, and the hope is that keeps some innovation alive at that high level.
Yeah.
And Northrop Grumman, bought Orbital ATK, and I think the thinking was, well, look, they could do that, so Lockheed can do this.
Yeah.
But that was the sole survivor of the big rocket engine producers who were publicly traded, and I don't think the Department of Justice wanted it to disappear.
Yeah. No, and we'll definitely, I guess we'll see how that, or if that does anything other than just maintain the status quo. Speaking of status quo, it seems like for a lot of these contractors, it's almost a flat line of contracts from the government, whether it's continuing resolutions or just shifting priorities. Do you see that starting to trickle down to their supply chains and have an impact where those suppliers are starting to move away, or just otherwise give those second and third order effects starting to happen?
Actually, I think you're seeing more of the traditional A&D supply base moved towards defense, because
Oh, okay.
defense, and the reason is because of the pandemic.
Ah.
The Department of Defense did an outstanding job of pushing liquidity into the big primes,
Mhm.
and how can I say, forcing them essentially to push
Yeah.
it down into their suppliers. So if you
Oh, okay.
were a supplier and you had a more commercial oriented business that was really getting hit hard because of
Yeah.
the pandemic, your defense business actually ended up being very, very, it was a good thing to have from a
Oh, wow.
liquidity perspective. So I
Okay.
think you're seeing, more, I think more suppliers looking at defense as another angle to diversify for a rainy day. And the other nice thing about defense, and I think this is kind of, evident to the supply chain, and you can see it with some of the new space companies. Let me just bring up, Terran as an example. The government's a big contractor.
Yeah.
It's a big customer of theirs. And government contracts are nice because the government pays.
Yeah.
And their payment terms are generally well understood and generally pretty friendly.
Yeah.
So as you're building out a business that might have a commercial aspect to it, if you have a nice foundation of government work, that's something you can build off of.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Has that, lack of government work impacted a lot of those companies that have gone public through SPACs over the last 9 months to a year?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, has it impacted it? And to some degree, right? So if you look at, let's just pick one. The first of the commercial space companies to go public, Virgin Galactic.
Yeah.
Their government work's pretty limited, right? So
Yeah.
it's really, really tied to this commercial business. Now they've got some, right? But it's kind of like government work under commercial terms,
Yeah.
but it's pretty limited. So, they kind of live or die by that customer and that business model.
Right.
And the stock's been very volatile because of it. Now, all the SPACs have been in general, but if you don't have the access to a nice, consistent government foundation, it can make your life just more difficult. Another example, if you look at, say, Rocket Lab actually really hasn't been all that volatile. I mean, it's been volatile, but compared to some of the other companies,
Sure.
not as volatile,
Yeah.
but they have a nice base of government business that they're doing.
Right. No, and I'm sure that, definitely helps calm the public markets at the very least.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. Do you see other companies that maybe have that base, thinking that, maybe 22 is a good year to continue the SPAC trend, versus maybe others that were interested and see the results turning away?
Yeah, I would expect to, so to be clear, I'm not an investment banker, right? I don't
Sure.
SPACs, so just to tell everybody, but a SPAC is just an alternative way to do an IPO.
Yeah.
Right. It turns out it's a quicker way. There's positives and there's minuses with it. Do I see more companies doing them? Yes, probably at a slower rate because the SPAC market itself kind of got painted with a weird brush. Could you see companies come public that are maybe farther along that might do a more traditional IPO path? Yeah, probably. I think you'll see a mix of both.
Yeah. No, we've heard that there's not a return to, but this idea that doing the deliberate nature of an IPO with all of its regulatory requirements and the like might be a way for some of these space companies to instill trust ahead of actually going public.
And a SPAC can be a complicated transaction because it's sort of this weird merger with another company.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen in terms of what you're communicating and how you're doing things. Where if you just do a straight up IPO, there's just one cook in the kitchen and an advisor, and it's a different process. And like I said, there's pluses and minuses with both of them. But so I would expect to see both going forward.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. During the pandemic, we saw a surprising, not stability, but continued investment and innovation in the space sector, that it didn't seem to drop off like a lot of other sectors did. is that, what was the most surprising part of that for you when you were looking across the sector?
So I would say this, I mean, and it's broader than just space. For having, covered the sector for over 20 years and worked in the sector.
Yeah.
Yeah, aerospace and defense was sort of this, and it's just sound horrible to say, but from a innovation perspective, a little bit of a backwater. Things didn't move that quick.
Yeah.
You had a couple things going on the side. Obviously you had SpaceX around for a while and Blue Origin, but they were kind of considered different because they had a different funding source, and maybe they were thought of as a bit of a hobby. But now things have really changed. What's really, I think, fascinating and exciting is you have so much going on in space, both in terms of spacecraft, space infrastructure, launch. I mean, you can kind of look through the numbers, right? I mean, it's really remarkable about the numbers of the size of investments being made across the whole space stack. But it's not just space.
No.
It's electrification of commercial aircraft. It's people, it's looking at hydrogen, looking at hybrid, eVTOLs. It's so for a young engineer getting out of school today, particularly in aerospace, it's a really exciting time where, for a long time, you got an aerospace degree, you can only go work at Boeing if you wanted to work on an airplane and stay in North America. It was really, now there's a whole multitude of things you can do. So, from that perspective, it's a very, very exciting time in the space. And it's was I surprised that the pandemic didn't slow it? Honestly, not really, right? Because it's bigger than the pandemic.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, these are trends. I mean, I hate to use sort of the jargon, but these are kind of mega trends that a pandemic's not going to stop.
Okay.
Right. Space is a big place, right? And electrification's a big thing. And so and I think to some degree it slowed things a little bit because it made working more complicated and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's a super exciting time to be, in some ways, my son's in college studying mechanical engineering.
Yeah.
I'm almost a little jealous of, like, when he gets out of school, all the interesting things he'll be able to do. Yeah.
No, because it seems like, easily 40, 50, 60 years now, the speed of a flight for commercial transportation has more or less stayed the same, other than the Concorde. And that was it. You had it was whether you had a narrow body or wide body for aircraft in the sector, and space was your government. And now everything's seems to be changing fast. So yeah, I would agree. It's an exciting time.
It's a remarkable time, and I think there's got to be a lot of credit given to those guys who were just hobbyists, right?
Yeah.
That, SpaceX changed the game, and Blue Origin did, and I think they opened doors, and they proved things to, I think, the broader markets and the government that, hey, you know what, a commercial entity can do this.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah. No, and so on the theme of the next generation, we've heard from a handful of organizations that are investors, venture or family office type ones, that they have a lot of trouble finding analysts and that analytic support in the aerospace, specifically space, but just in general, that those workers are hard to find. Your bio is one that is probably not what comes to mind when somebody thinks, oh, a financial analyst for a major bank. What is it you would say to people that, what kind of people can and maybe should start looking at being and entering the financial analyst track?
Yeah, so it's funny you should ask that, and this is not an advertisement for this, but I'm looking to hire a couple of people right now, and and maybe it's my own bias, but I like looking at engineers. You can learn accounting, right?
Yeah.
If you know how to do a differential equation, you can learn how to do accounting. And it's and I find and this is true, I think, for anything. If you like what you're doing and you have a passion about what you're doing, you'll be successful at it. So for folks that have an interest in aerospace or space or defense, that analyst role can be a lot of fun because you get to look at everything. It's you're not limited to just one part of one system. So to someone that likes that, like I tell people, I could never do my job, or at least not as successfully if I was covering retail, because I just don't care. I mean, I order stuff from an LLB and catalog. I mean, that's me, right? I really don't care. But as long as you're covering and working in an area that you've got a passion for, it's very rare where, for myself, I actually think about my job as a job.
Yeah.
Of course, there's times you travel, you get tired and this, that, but you like what you're doing. And I think I think people have to bear in mind, both employers and potential employees, that that you got your degree in mechanical engineering. That's cool, you can do that, but you can also do a lot of other things, and you can apply those skills, and vice versa.
Yeah, you can't train passion.
Yep, that's right.
Great conversation, guys.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Ron. This is
it's been
my
really
pleasure.
Good. Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, I think a lot about the labor market for space and all the complaining that goes on about how we can't find anybody. And I'm like, have you called those 3,000 people from Peloton? Probably some engineers, probably some technicians.
But you know what the big trick is? And this is the double-edged sword of it being such an exciting time. There's a lot of different things people can do.
Yeah.
You can go work in eVTOL. You can go work on a CubeSat. I mean, if you want to work at Boeing, you can go work at Boeing, but you don't have to. And there's so many options out there now. It's a good problem, I think, right? That there's so many innovative things you can do.
It's exciting. Well, thank you so much. Great to have you back, and hopefully we'll see you again another time.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, you bet.